we're going to start 10.4 part 1, which is use square roots to solve quadratic equations. So we have been talking quadratic. It's always dangerous to talk about something else while I'm writing. We have been talking about all the different ways of solving quadratic equation. Graphing, right? Factoring. And today we're going to talk about square roots. Later this week we're going to talk about something called completing the square. And finally we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. Solving just means what is x. In other words, what are the x-intercepts? That's all that solving means. It's the same as finding the zero of a function. Okay? So finding square roots, first I'll show you just by drawing a graph. And I consider this lesson slightly cheating, and I'll explain to you why. Because they're going to give you x squared equals d, which does not look like the equations that we've been using, right? But what they've done is this is really x squared minus d equals 0, where this is actually, d is actually a number. So for example, it'll be like x squared minus, let's see, 4 equals 0, just so you have an idea of what they mean. And then they're moving this 4 over, right? And so really that d is really what we were calling c, right? It's the equivalent of x squared, ax squared plus bx plus c, right? Where, let me just make sure there's an a, and there's a b, and there's a c. And what they've done for the square root portion is they've taken out this middle part, right? And simplified it to ax squared plus c, right? And they're basically saying you just have this term and this term. You've got the x squared term and a number and nothing else. That's how they're getting this, okay? And that's why it's going to be pretty easy. This is not a hard lesson at all. So just to show you what is meant, if I am solving this, right, and I'll solve this on a right, and it makes it much easier when I have an actual number. If I were solving this, I know that this is the positive and negative square root of 4, right? We're going to take square root of both sides. So my answer is x equals plus or minus 2, okay? And so if this number over here, right, if this number over here is a positive, in other words, it's greater than 0, so that's their first thing. If d is greater than 0, it's a positive number, then you're going to have two solutions, plus or minus 2, right? And so in that situation, they're showing you're going to have two solutions for your parabola, like that. Okay. Now, what happens if d equals 0? In other words, if you get down to here, right? And so what happens if you get down here? So this is the d equals greater than 0. What happens if you get down here and you get x squared equals 0, right? This d is 0. Well, in that situation, then you'll have only one solution. This is if d equals 0. So if d equals 0, you have only one solution, which is going to be your vertex, okay? So this is one solution. And this one at the top was two solutions. Right? And then last, actually I'm just going to sneak in the word two solutions so it's clear. And last, we're going to see what happens if D is less than 0. Let me change colors here. See if we can get purple to work. So if D is less than 0, right? I'm going to do that over here. D is less than 0, then I'm going to have a negative number, right? So D, this is -4, right? So this is where D is less than 0. Well, if that is the situation, there's no solution, right? There can't be any solution because you can't have the square root of a negative number, right? So that situation, we're just going to put this, it's going to be along this line down here, right? You have the D is less than 0 line because there's no intersection with the parabola, right? So essentially you have a parabola here and they're telling you if D is greater than 0, you're going to have two points. If D is 0, you're going to have 1 point. And if D is less than 0, you have no solution. Okay? It is much easier to do in practice than to talk about the theory. So on the right, I'm just going to quickly work out a couple of problems and just draw a line down the middle just to give us a little space. And if you want to follow what I'm doing in the book, I'm going to go through example 1 very quickly. What happens if I have 2x squared equals 8, right? And you can see that this came from the equation 2x squared minus 8 equals 0, right? And you can see it was missing the bx term. That's how we got there. Well, we can divide both sides by 2 and get x squared equals 4, which is right what we did here. So here we know the answer is plus or minus 2, right? So I have two solutions, x equals 2 and x equals -2. Let me try another one. If I start with the equation m squared minus 18 equals -18. Of course, I need to, if I'm solving a square root, I want the squared term on one side equals a number on the other. I have to get it into that, into that format. So I'm going to add 18 to both sides. And if I add 18 to both sides, I'll get m squared equals 0. Well, therefore, my solution, m equals 0, and I have one solution, which is going to be my vertex. And finally, at the bottom, if I'm given a third situation, two solutions, one solution, b squared plus 12 equals 5. And I'm going to subtract 12 to get b squared on one side. And if I subtract 12 from both sides, I get -7. Well, I cannot take a square root of a negative number, so no solution. Okay? So that is just sort of a brief introduction of what we're going to do, and I'm just going to follow and do examples 2 and 3, and this just will be a pretty short lesson today.